time to hit the road. Get ready to turn left. Turn left. Keep right and then turn right. Turn right. Get ready to turn left. Turn left. Get ready to turn right. Turn right. Keep left and then turn left. Turn left. Get ready to turn right. Turn right.
Good evening. It's John with the Freightliner FLB. Um, we're going to start with Fairlane Carolina. Let's go ahead and just start right now. So, and, the three cities that is supposed to be discovered. And, so, and, the story was not
Okay, here
in
we go.
the journal.
Recomputing. Go straight on. Get ready to turn right. Turn right.
Hey y'all, this is Dominic Anthony Walsh. I cover education for Houston Public Media. As you can imagine, it's an interesting time to be on the education beat in Houston. We have a new podcast about the state takeover of Houston ISD. It's called The Takeover. You can find it everywhere you listen to podcasts.
See trees broken and uprooted. There's just a devastating amount of damage to homes and businesses. Buildings are razed, glass shattered, roofs caved in, and power lines are strung across the street in some places. But some buildings are still standing, and workers like Bob Sanders were there to help board up windows to prevent further damage.
Old friend of mine owns this, so I'm here to help them. And this lady is a real good friend with my uncle, so I'm going to help her. Just down here to help.
So there were a handful of residents walking among the rubble. I spoke with two of them who were born in Sulphur. One wanted to see what happened to the historic downtown. You know, it's on the National Registry of Historic Places. And the other, a business owner, wanted to check on her property. It was in bad shape. This was their hometown, and the damage just shocked them.
This town, Sulphur, it's also in the Chickasaw Nation, right? Like, how are tribal officials there responding to this disaster?
Well, Sulphur is a small town of about 5,000 people. The Chickasaw Nation Emergency Management and the Chickasaw Light Horse Police Department have been working in Sulphur all weekend. George Jesse is the nation's Central Region Emergency Manager, and he's been on the scene. He told me he only had hours of sleep when I talked to him.
So seeing how I can affect and bring somebody some type of closure during an event like this, just showing them, a little kindness goes a long ways.
What about other parts of the state? What do we know about the destruction there?
Significant damage has been reported after a line of storms ripped through most of the state. Sulphur experienced severe damage, and the National Weather Service reports another tornado in Marietta was on the ground for 27 miles with wind speeds up to 170 miles per hour. State officials have confirmed at least 100 injuries, too, and damage estimates are still unfolding. There were multiple tornadoes that ripped across the area. The National Weather Service says as of today, they counted at least 22 in this weekend's tornado outbreak in Oklahoma. Now, just in comparison, last year, we had a total of 74 tornadoes.
Over the whole year. Well, what's coming next in recovery efforts there?
Well, Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt said he has not seen this much destruction during his 6 years as governor and has issued an executive order declaring a state of emergency in 12 Oklahoma counties. Chickasaw Nation Governor Bill Anatubby released a statement saying the nation is evaluating the extent of the damage and will continue to work with partners and help however it can. The American Red Cross of Oklahoma is there too. Students at Sulphur Public Schools are out of class following the storm. There's extensive water damage and every school bus was damaged according to a letter from the district. Officials hope to be back in school by the end of the week and are working to confirm transportation for students.
That is Anna Pope with member station KOSU. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you.
Supreme Court is considering a case on whether camping bans that appear to target homeless people are constitutional when that person has nowhere else to go. And the case may focus on a ban in Grants Pass, Oregon, but the outcome will have consequences across the country, including places like Kentucky, where lawmakers just passed a similar ban. Kentucky Public Radio's Sylvia Goodman has the story.
Let me hear you one time. Housing, not handcuffs. Housing, not handcuffs. Housing, not handcuffs. Housing, not handcuffs.
Advocates for homeless Kentuckians set up tents in a park across from a federal building in Louisville. They're calling on the U.S. Supreme Court to strike down a ban on unauthorized camping in public. The court heard oral arguments on the case out of Grants Pass, Oregon last week.
I just find that cruel and unusual punishment.
That's Morrow Jones. He just got the keys to a house after being homeless for nearly a year.
Some people look at you just like you're nothing, like you're just trash. They should have houses for every person that is homeless in this country, not just in Louisville.
For Kentucky and a few other states around the country, the stakes of this Supreme Court decision are especially high. Just a few weeks ago, Kentucky's Republican-controlled legislature passed a statewide ban on street camping, essentially a ban on public homelessness. One of the bill's sponsors, Republican State Representative John Hodgson, says it's a matter of compassion, and cities need more tools to get people off the streets.
Even formerly addicted homeless people that I've talked to, they said, we need tough love. We need somebody to force us into rehab, because when we're in the throes of addiction, we don't want to go.
Kentucky's new law would impose a Class B misdemeanor for second offenses. That carries a maximum $250 fine and 90 days in jail. Housing advocates in Kentucky and across the country say the bans effectively banish homeless people, some of whom have no other option but to sleep on the streets. James Suey, who is currently homeless, is from Murray, Kentucky, which has no emergency shelter. He says when he lost his housing, he left the area to find a shelter, but not everyone has that option.
And we don't need to be putting people in jail, just because they can't afford to sleep somewhere.
Homelessness is on the rise in Kentucky and across the country. According to a U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development survey, more people were homeless in Kentucky last year than they have been since 2014. And across the country, homelessness increased 70% between 2021 and 2023. Eric Tars is the Senior Policy Director at the National Homelessness Law Center. He says cities and states have increasingly turned to these bans instead of addressing an affordable housing crisis.
Because it's the most politically expedient thing to do to just pass a law and hide the cost of it in the jail budgets, in the law enforcement budgets.
According to a city study, Louisville needs 36,000 more affordable units for the lowest income households.
And you can make that one encampment disappear for that one constituent, but you're not actually solving homelessness for that person, and so it's just gonna move that camp somewhere else.
Meanwhile, opponents to the bans say they are cruel and unusual, that you can't make someone's status a crime, and they say the laws aren't applied to everyone equally. Here's University of Louisville law professor Sam Marcus.
The city doesn't enforce this law against them. It enforces it against people who are homeless.
If the U.S. Supreme Court rules against the camping ban in Grants Pass, it would open the door for constitutional challenges in other states, says Northern Kentucky University law professor Kenneth Katkin.
If they challenge it under the U.S. Constitution, the outcomes are going to be identical.
But Katkin says after listening to last week's hearing, he's ready to predict the outcome of the case.
I feel confident to predict that the Supreme Court is going to uphold the Oregon law and reverse the Ninth Circuit.
Kentucky's ban won't go into effect until mid-July, and the Supreme Court is expected to issue a ruling at the end of June. For NPR News, I'm Sylvia Goodman in Louisville.
And in Houston, it's 6:29, and you've been listening to All Things Considered on your NPR station, News 87.
Are you getting enough sleep? The new poll says most Americans are not.
There are a million invisible details that we are managing. When we go to bed at night, it is very unlikely that all of those things have been laid to rest.
Why we don't sleep on the next morning edition from NPR News.
And we'll have local news with Matt Harab along with your host, Jared Carroll, tomorrow morning starting at 1 o'clock.
Elevate your impact with Houston Public Media. Today is New Member Monday. Now is the perfect moment to make a difference by becoming a new member. Your first donation supports trusted news, educational documentaries, and enriching arts on air. Join us in our mission to inform, educate, and inspire Houston. Visit HoustonPublicMedia.org/donate and make your first contribution today. Together, let's shape a future filled with quality programming and community engagement. Thank you for being a vital part of Houston Public Media.
On the westbound side of I-10, you're unwinding now from the West Sam. That earlier wreck at Eldridge has been cleared out of the left lane. 80 degrees right now at the UH campus at 6:30.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive Insurance. The Name Your Price tool provides a range of coverage options. Progressive.com. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Data or datum? We're good either way. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace Price is supported by the United States Postal Service, offering postage stamps for purchase at more than 40,000 supermarkets, drugstores, office suppliers, and wholesale clubs. And by Rubrik. When cyber attacks put businesses at risk, Rubrik provides the power to bounce back fast. More at Rubrik.com. And by Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, working to treat previously untreatable cancers through protein degradation, which can target cancer-causing proteins and destroy them. Danafarber.org/everywhere.
Go straight on.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kyle Rizdal. It is Monday today, the 29th of April. Good as always to have you along, everybody. We try to shy away from hyperbole on this program, but sometimes the news is what the news is. And this is a big news week for this economy. Data is the word to the wise, in the plural, by the way, and it's coming from everywhere. Reports from the private sector will include the Consumer Confidence Index from the Conference Board and a key index on manufacturing from the Institute for Supply Management. There is federal data coming as well. The Labor Department will give us the Employment Cost Index, literally how much labor is costing employers. We'll get the JOLTS data as well, open jobs in this economy. And then the biggie on Friday, the April unemployment report. Now, you do not have to be a too terribly regular listener to this program to know that data is the lifeblood of the Federal Reserve of late. The central bank wants to see more of it over more time. And the cornucopia of data coming this week is very now. The federal funds rate is going to stay where it is. But all the same, we thought it would be a good idea for Marketplace's Justin Ho to get a read on how Chair Powell and the gang are thinking about things.
Let's get one type of data out of the way. When it comes to prices, we know exactly what the Fed is looking for.
Very, very low rates of price increases.
That's Jay Bryson, chief economist at Wells Fargo. Thing is, keeping price increases low and steady is only half of the Federal Reserve's famous low mandate. The other half is maximizing employment. If the unemployment rate rises when the jobs report comes out this week, Bryson says that could actually be good news because it could mean more people joined the labor force and started looking for jobs.
That would help keep wage gains in check, and that's also a very important critical component of inflation.
Previous jobs reports have shown that wage gains have been slowing down. Winnie Caesar, global head of strategy at Credit Sites, says if wages stagnate,
that would begin to tell the Fed that there's maybe a little bit more slack in the labor market than they are currently viewing.
And maybe the Fed will start thinking it's time to cut interest rates. On the other hand, Caesar says wage gains could pick up again.
And that would be yet another data point to kind of confirm that the Fed should probably stay a little bit more restrictive for longer than most people were expecting, at least at the beginning of the year.
There's also the Institute for Supply Management's Manufacturing Index, another private sector reports out this week that'll give us a sense of how the economy's doing more generally. Tim Dewey, chief U.S. economist at SGH Macro Advisors, says the Fed will be watching for whether those come in stronger than expected.
And if that's the case, then they're going to say, well, wait a second here, why should we cut rates anytime soon?
But since inflation has been pretty stubborn this year, Dewey says the Fed just isn't as concerned with those private sector data points, or even the labor market for that matter.
It would have to take some big moves, big negative moves in the rest of the economy in order to divert your focus from the inflation mandate.
Dewey says once the Fed feels confident enough that it's tamed inflation, then it can focus on the job market. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
No big negative moves on Wall Street this Monday. Up moderately. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. The average late fee on a credit card bill right now, and this is from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, is $32. And that, says the CFPB, which is to say the Biden administration, is a junk fee. And the White House is trying to crack down on them by capping that late fee that banks charge credit card users at $8 per transaction. Good for consumers, right? Not great if you're a bank. Also, it's safe to say that retailers like Nordstrom and Macy's and Kohl's aren't wild about it either, especially given the hard-ish times that those chains now find themselves in. Because, as Marketplace's Kristen Schwab reports, those credit cards have become an important part of department stores' bottom lines.
When you think of credit cards, you might think of one of the big issuers, like Visa or MasterCard, or maybe you think of banks. But credit cards were actually invented by retailers.
In the beginning, this was just done as a bookkeeping thing, in a notebook behind the counter, essentially.
Bill Maurer is a professor of anthropology and law at the University of California, Irvine. He says these less formal lines of credit were the standard for a while, but eventually stores started offering physical cards. They were these small metal plates.
Kind of look the same size and shape as a military dog tag that would have the customer's information on it.
The point was to create customer loyalty. It was the early 20th century, and new stores were opening left and right.
Retailers and merchants really saw the way to get customers to keep coming back to their shop instead of going to others, to the point where some merchants and things.
Retailers eventually realized they are better at selling stuff than lending money, and actual banks took over the logistics. But store cards are still an important piece of their business today. They help retailers gather data on what people are buying and promote targeted discounts. And Moody's retail analyst Christina Boney says these credit cards connect customers to the brand.
I do remember that I was really excited to have a Bloomingdale's credit card.
She says store cards encourage spending. They also generate another line of income because they have steeper interest rates than bank-issued cards. Those rates recently hit record highs of nearly 29%. One analyst estimates that Macy's makes nearly half of its operating profits from its credit card program. Boney says the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's move to limit late fees will hurt department stores the most.
It's one more thing that they're going to have to contend with and going to have to pivot. If you think about those lost dollars just flow directly right to the bottom line.
Now, there will always be some demand for store cards, says Ted Rossman, a credit card analyst at Bankrate.com. It's often easier to get approved for, say, a Gap card than an American Express, so it's many people's first line of credit. And sometimes store cards are the only solution to a financial emergency.
Point of sale, easy financing, like somebody who really needs credit now because otherwise they're not going to be able to buy that new refrigerator or that new set of tires.
But Rossman says those customers are increasingly moving away from credit cards and instead are choosing buy now, pay later options like Affirm and Klarna. To lure them back, he says more retailers might move towards co-branded cards. Those are cards issued by the store that can be used anywhere, not just at the one brand.
A retailer like Costco, that's a really popular card, not just for Costco, but for gas and travel and other things.
And retailers will need to push their cards even harder. So we might experience that familiar moment at checkout even more when the sales associate motions toward that little pamphlet by the cash register.
They tell you, right? Save 10% off today's purchase, 20% off today's purchase.
Sounds pretty good until you compare it to that 30% APR. I'm Kristen Schwab for Marketplace.
We don't have, as far as I know, a Marketplace credit card. But you know what we do have? A podcast. Check it out, marketplace.org, or obviously follow us on the platform of your choice. Spent 8.3 times their annual earnings to be able to buy a home. That is double what it was in 2000. So that's item one. Item two is the computer game The Sims, originally released in 2000, a game where you create and control digital installment of our series, Adventures in Housing.
My name's Elle Hunt. I live in Norwich, England, and a few months after I put in an offer on my first flat, I started paying The Sims. I hadn't played it since 2000 when I was 8 years old, and it was a real kind of slight of nostalgia for me. I was always very focused on the home ownership aspect of it. I would use cheat codes to give me limitless funds and create sort of gargantuan palaces, and there's a lot of attention paid to the interior design, the decor, and if I couldn't afford it, I'd just give myself more money. The Sims had really kind of seeded that desire for home ownership in me at a young age, and what it represented, the stability, the sense of that you could create a dwelling that really reflected your whole being. And I'd spent the interim, 20 plus years walking away from that dream a bit, and here I was back again. I felt quite wistful for the hopes and feelings that I had as a child of what adulthood would be like. I also was reflecting on how different it had been and how much harder. It was only when I was in university, I think, or about to graduate, that I realized how bad the housing market was headed. And since then, it's pretty steadily gotten worse, no matter where I've lived. Returning to The Sims, being kind of reminded of all of that childhood optimism I had, or just not even optimism, the sense that if I worked hard, by 30, I would be able to have a house where I could knock down a wall. That has not been a guarantee. I moved in about 6 weeks ago. When I got the keys, it sort of hit me how with that freedom also comes a lot of choices and a lot of bills. And you do have to afford it within the reality of your income. It is not as easy as The Sims made it out to be by, clicking a wall, don't like that color, click again. Oh, you're out of money? We can fix that. There are no cheat codes in real life. Looking back on my past 8-year-old self playing The Sims, making her kind of quick mansions in the suburbs, I think she would have anticipated that I would have maybe had a bigger house and maybe in London, to be honest, at the age of 33 and where I'm at in my career. But I can also see, looking back, like I made choices that were within reach that I could afford, and I'm very happy with where I've ended up.
Elle Hunt, happy in her flat in Norwich, England. Housing is indeed a global story. So tell us your adventure, would you, wherever you live. You can do it at marketplace.org.
There's nothing about the desk phone that I miss.
Literally have not used the one in my office in better than 4 years now. First, though, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial's up 146 points, about 0.4%, 38,386. The Nasdaq advanced 55 points, 0.3%, finished at 15,983. The S&P 500 added 16 points, also 0.3%, 51 and 16. We get first quarter results from Amazon tomorrow. Can't wait that long? All right, fine. Here's one morsel to take the edge off. The company says more customers are waiting less time for their orders. Nearly 60% of Prime orders in the top 60 metro areas in this economy arrive the same day or next day. That's up from 50% about a year ago. Amazon delivered 0.75% to investors today. Tesla surged 15%. That's after Beijing apparently nodded yes to the question, hey, can we bring our controversial advanced self-driving service thingy to your massive market? You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive Insurance, helping protect small businesses and the owners that run them. Whether a plumber, accounting business, or restaurant, Progressive can help with over 30 customizable coverages. Online quotes available in as little as 6 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. And by Baird. Baird strives to attract and retain top financial professionals, providing stability and continuity of advice for clients across market environments. More information at BairdDifference.com. And by Rubrik, a cybersecurity company focused on securing the world's data. When cyber attacks put businesses, reputations, and careers at risk, Rubrik provides the power to bounce back fast and become cyber resilient. Rubrik.com.
646, it's News 87.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from CertaPro Painters, offering interior and exterior paint refresh services and color advice for home or business. Consultations and more at CertaPro.com. Support comes from Carr, Riggs & Ingram, CPAs and Advisors, a top 25 nationally ranked full-service accounting and advisory firm offering tax, audit, accounting, consulting, and advisory services. Learn more at CRICPA.com. Support comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' comp provider committed to making businesses and communities better by providing support for working families and workforce development to build a stronger economic future. More at texasmutual.com/better. Support comes from the Houston Symphony, presenting In the Fiddler's House, a celebration of traditional klezmer music, featuring virtuoso violinist Itzhak Perlman. One night only, Sunday, May 12th. Tickets at houstonsymphony.org.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Risdall. Sunday was a big day at the Port of Baltimore, which welcomed its first container ship since the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed last month. The ship squeaked in through a temporary 35-foot deep channel that opened up at the end of last week. Mostly, it should be said, to let ships that had been stuck in port out. But even the relative trickle of incoming traffic is a bright spot for the thousands of workers and the dozens and dozens of small businesses that move cargo in, out, and around the Port of Baltimore. Marketplace's Amy Scott spent some time on the ground to see how it's been going.
Inside an 80,000 square foot warehouse in Baltimore, a young man unloads boxes of canned albacore tuna from the back of a truck and stacks them on a pallet. Next, the pallet will get wrapped in stretchy plastic and whisked away on a forklift to be stacked among food from China, Europe, and South America.
We have lemon juice. We have banana chips. A lot of olives.
Sue Monahan founded Baltimore International Warehousing and Transportation in 1987. Today, she has 4 warehouses and 70 employees. And before the Key Bridge collapsed last month, she says most of this cargo would have come in on container ships through the Port of Baltimore, just 10 minutes away. Now it's arriving at the Port of Norfolk, Virginia, several hours to the south, or New York to the north.
So other truckers are bringing it to the warehouse where normally we would take it in. Our own trucks would pick it up. So we lose out on that revenue.
After the bridge collapsed, Monahan still had some containers to pick up at the port, but with no more coming in, she had to lay off most of her drivers. She left it to HR manager Kristen Perrin to have those conversations.
They were difficult. A lot of them were understanding, like they expected it, they knew it would be coming, but it's probably the worst part of my job.
But a few weeks later, Monahan says the state approved the company for a worker retention grant,
which will allow us to keep the drivers employed even when we don't have a full day for them. They don't have to collect unemployment, which is not enough money for them to live on. So we'll be able to at least keep them employed, we think, until the cargo returns to Baltimore.
And in the meantime, they've done the paperwork and permitting so their own drivers can pick up and deliver at the ports of Norfolk and Philadelphia. Monahan was able to call all of her 16 staff drivers back. In the dispatch office, a large screen shows each driver's location on a map. A week earlier, it would have been mostly empty. But now, several names with their truck numbers are moving throughout the region, tracked by GPS.
And you can see there's some drivers in Norfolk, some coming back from Norfolk. We have drivers up in Pennsylvania, New Jersey. They don't like to be tracked, but I love it.
In the early afternoon, afternoon, one of those drivers pulls into the yard. How's it going? Laquan Jefferson has just returned from delivering an empty container to Norfolk. He's been driving with the company for 8 years and says the last couple weeks were tough.
When you get that phone call saying, sorry, we're going to have to let you go, and you got children and bills and everything to pay, you get worried about certain things, but luckily, they called me back.
He's still getting used to the long drive. He started his day at 3 a.m., and it took him 4.5 hours going down to Virginia.
Coming back depends on what time you leave. Friday, it took me 6.5 hours to get home. And I like to drive, but I don't like to sit.
Still, he'd rather sit in traffic than at home not getting paid.
There's really no choice, so, you want to work. But yeah, it's a nice little ride.
One he probably won't have to do much longer. The Army Corps of Engineers plans to reopen the port's main shipping channel by the end of May. But Sue Monahan says that won't mean business as usual.
Vessels still won't come to Baltimore because the steamship lines are not booking cargo to Baltimore until the channel opens. So I think it's going to be another month and a half before those ships come back to Baltimore.
This has all been pretty instructive for her daughter, Shannon, who wants to take over the business someday.
She's getting quite an education.
Yeah, you still want to take it over after this? Shannon Monahan says, yeah.
We're still here, we're still going. All of our trucks are here now and moving.
Now they're hoping their customers will stick with them until business does get back to normal. In Baltimore, I'm Amy Scott for Marketplace.
Technology has a way of just disappearing things sometimes, Payphones come to mind, and in that vein, old-style landlines more generally. Turns out barely a quarter of adults in the United States still have them, and it may be getting harder to hang on to them. AT&T and the rest are looking to get out of the regular old copper wire landline business altogether and transition to fiber optics. Also, there's mobile, which is increasingly taking over in the business world where once upon a time, the desk phone reigned supreme. Marketplace's Megan McCarty-Carino has that one.
Juliet P.A. can still visualize the massive desk phone at her first job out of college in 2016.
It was one of those big, serious phones.
And it rang constantly.
I want to say, I was on the phone like it was my job, but it literally was my job, so.
P.A. was the receptionist at a patent law office in Greenville, South Carolina, with about 100 employees.
Doherty Manning, this is Juliet. How may I help you?
That was her phone voice. And she had a big printout of office extensions, which she marked with asterisks. Who wanted calls sent to voicemail or transferred to an assistant.
It was everything. It was absolutely everything.
And then, nothing. PA says in subsequent jobs, she found herself suddenly without that bulky piece of equipment on her desk. She now works in marketing at a real estate firm, which had kept a few desk phones for senior staffers, but even those people have recently been told they need to give them up. Barb Grothy is an independent communications technology consultant who's worked on corporate telephony systems since the 1980s.
There's nothing about the desk phone that I miss.
She first noticed companies getting rid of the curly-corded hardware in the early 2010s, when internet-based phone systems became the norm. Workers could make calls on their computers or route them to a smartphone. And then there was the rise of video calls, instant messaging apps.
Now with hybrid work and since COVID has happened, give me my laptop and give me my cell phone and I'm a happy camper.
Desk phones are still common in industries like government or healthcare where security is a top concern. But she says many other businesses no longer want to shell out to upgrade equipment that now feels unnecessary. Work has increasingly shifted off the desk, says Sharon Storch, an organizational communications professor at the University of Nebraska at Omaha.
And it moves with us in every space and in any time.
not being tied to a hardwired device that's fixed to a particular location means it's hard to step away, literally.
When there's no turn-off switch, then that's when things start to occur as far as burnout.
She says smartphones contain worlds that can easily suck you in, like a work email when you're having dinner with your family, or the reverse.
You're in the middle of a really big meeting. You're trying to really focus on something at work time, right? And then you pick up your phone, if you're using it for both, and you got a picture of your dog just finished being groomed, or you got a picture of the home security camera that dinged because your mailman came.
And the costs are often more than psychological, says Carrie Stevens at UT Austin's Technology and Information Policy Institute.
Organizations are asking their employees to use their personal devices, and quite often in the U.S., it's without additional compensation.
Only a handful of states require employers to reimburse staff for using their cell phones for work.
Not everybody does have unlimited plans, and not everybody wants their personal device to be used for work.
Juliet P.A. at the real estate office in South Carolina says she tries not to give out her personal number for work and sticks to email and Zoom calls.
Now that personal and business are completely together like peanut butter and jelly, I do not want people having that much access to me.
She says one of her colleagues is even considering buying a cheap flip phone to leave at the office. I'm Megan McCarty-Carino for Marketplace. Finding a new route.
Go straight on.
Marketplace is supported by
Let's
Betterment,
find a new route.
the automated investing platform that helps make it easy to be invested for the long term. Learn more at betterment.com. Investing involves risk. And by C3 Generative AI. Verified, traceable answers, secure, hallucination-free, LLM-agnostic, IP liability-free. Learn more at c3.ai.
This final note on the way out today, see if this rings true for you. I saw in the Wall Street Journal today that high grocery prices mean the days of us taking one trip to one supermarket to get our groceries are changing. Grocery prices, as you may know but not be able to quantify, are up 21% in the past 3 years, and that data is from the Labor Department. What it means in practice is more stops at more different stores. The market research firm Alex Partners says we are making 8% more trips to buy the groceries we want. Our daily production team includes Andy Corbin, Elise Hassan, Maria Hollenhorst, Sarah Leeson, Sean McHenry, and Sophia Terenzio. I'm Kai Rizdal. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.
We're a minute away from 7 o'clock on a Monday evening on your NPR station, News 88.7. 80 degrees right now here at the UH campus, and this weather update sponsored by Paul D. Clote, attorney, mediator, arbitrator. We are 59 minutes away from sunset. We'll have increasing clouds overnight with a low around 69. Tomorrow sunrise at 6:39. Some patchy morning fog. After that, gradually becoming sunny and a high near 83. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday each bring about a 40% chance of afternoon showers and storms. Otherwise, cloudy and breezy. Highs around 82 to 85.
Hi, I'm Craig Cohen. On the heels of protests at college campuses over the war in Gaza, including some here in Houston, we explore what a Supreme Court punt signals about the future of protesting in Texas and other states on the next Houston Matters.
That's tomorrow morning at 9 here on your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 88.7 in service of the University of Houston. I'm David Pittman. Thank you for letting us be a part of your life this afternoon. We'll be back together again tomorrow afternoon to do it all over at 2 o'clock and 7 o'clock.
The Weinstein survivors are pretty resolute. They don't really see this as changing the story. We never knew whether he would be convicted or not. But the story stands. It's the women who are the narrators of this story now, and that won't be overturned.
I'm Katrin Benholt. That's today on The Daily from The New York Times.
The Daily is supported by Ningio, cybersecurity awareness training designed to build a culture of cybersecurity. 3-minute episodes and more that teach employees to be unhackable. Ningio.com. And by Baird, employee-owned and independent. Baird offers global financial advice focused solely on clients' needs,
and then
while consistently reinvesting in the expertise and capabilities to serve those needs. More information at BairdDifference.com.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. The U.S. is stepping up pressure for a ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas officials are in Egypt, where they're discussing a new proposal. Meanwhile, ahead of a visit to Israel this week, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is calling on Hamas to accept the latest proposal, calling it extraordinarily generous on Israel's part. Here's Becky Sullivan's in Tel Aviv.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken is traveling in the region right now, and today he said that he's, quote, hopeful about a deal. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Israel is still hitting Rafah hard. Airstrikes there over the past 72 hours have killed around 40 Palestinians, more than half of whom are women and children. That's according to the Palestinian Center for Human Rights in Rafah.
While terms have not been made public, according to an Egyptian official and media reports,
Go straight on.
Israel has lowered the number of hostages it's demanding Hamas free during the initial 6-week phase of a ceasefire. That in return would call for the release of hundreds of Palestinians from Israeli prisons. With the start of a new week, things are heating up in a major way on college campuses today. Students continue to protest Israel's war in Gaza. At the University of Texas at Austin, police have been arresting student demonstrators, and at Columbia University, protesters defied a deadline they disbanded after an ultimatum was issued, saying they needed to leave an encampment this afternoon or face suspension. Colleges around the country have been dealing with student demonstrations over the rising Palestinian death toll in Gaza, and also with some counter-protests in support of Israel at a time the semester is winding down. Carbon dioxide emissions in the U.S. from energy-related sources fell last year. That's a step towards slowing down climate change, but it's not linearly enough, as we hear from NPR's Alejandro Barunda.
The U.S. uses a lot of energy. People put gas in their cars. They need electricity for powering buildings or pumping water. Fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas have been the primary source of that energy. But since 2005, the U.S.'s energy-related carbon dioxide emissions have actually dropped most years. The U.S. Energy Information Administration says 2023 continued the trend, with emissions shrinking 3%. The decrease stems primarily from U.S. power plants burning less coal, which produces more air pollution and carbon dioxide than other energy sources. But to keep Earth's temperatures in check, the UN says global emissions need to drop about 8% each year. Alejandro Barunda, NPR News.
Congress is agreeing to help the Federal Aviation Administration hire more air traffic controllers and safety inspectors, but a proposal that would have upped the retirement age for pilots won't be leaving the gate. Senate leaders saying today they've agreed on a $105 billion package for the FAA over the next 5 years. It will also approve new technology to avoid collisions between planes on the ground. The Senate bill dropped a House provision that would have raised pilots' retirement age from 65 to 67, lawmakers citing the fact that it would have been in conflict with rules in many other countries. On Wall Street today, the Dow was up 146 points and the NASDAQ rose 55 points. You're listening to NPR News in Washington. Some small towns in Oklahoma are cleaning up after a weekend onslaught of tornadoes. Flattened homes and buildings and killed at least 4 people, including an infant. In the town of Sulphur, Oklahoma, a tornado that hit late Saturday crumpled downtown buildings and sheared roofs from homes. Reports of at least 22 tornado touchdowns in the state, dozens of tornadoes in Iowa and Nebraska Friday, claiming at least 1 life. The elusive British street artist known as Banksy has made a name for himself with his politically conscious street art. But what do you do if you wake up to one of his murals painted on the side of your house? Well, it may sound exciting, but reporter Rebecca Rossman tells us it's complicated.
It's complicated for several reasons. There's the droves of camera-clad tourists that suddenly show up in front of your home, threats from greedy profiteers looking to make $1, or in some cases several million off the work, and then the vandalism. It took only 2 days for Banksy's latest piece, a tree-themed mural in North London, to be doused with white paint. And while an original Banksy can, in theory, be quite valuable, Banksy almost never delivers the certificates of authentication needed to convince most art galleries and collectors to buy the pieces, meaning his art might be destined to stay on the street after all. For NPR News, I'm Rebecca Rossman.
Pollution from plastics, including in the world's oceans, is a growing problem, but it now appears a number of countries have moving closer to doing something about it. Delegates and observers taking part in the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic Pollution are being involved. Perhaps the most controversial idea remains the idea of limiting the amount of plastic used worldwide. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Cigna Healthcare, a health benefits provider that advocates for better health through every stage of life. Learn more at Cigna.com. And listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
From the New York Times, I'm Katrin Benholt. This is The Daily. When Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein was convicted for sex crimes 4 years ago, it was celebrated as a watershed moment for the Me Too movement. Last week, New York's highest appeals court overturned that conviction. My colleague Jodi Kantor on what this ruling means for Weinstein and for the Me Too movement. It's Monday, April 29th. Jodi, you and your reporting partner, Megan Twohey, were the ones who broke the Harvey Weinstein scandal, which really defined the Me Too movement and was at the center of this court case. Explain what just happened.
So on Thursday morning, New York's highest court Harvey Weinstein's conviction for sex crimes. In 2020, he had been convicted of sexually abusing 2 women. He was sentenced to 23 years in jail. The prosecution really pushed the boundaries, and the conviction was always a little shaky, a little controversial. But it was a landmark sentence in part because Weinstein was a foundational figure in the Me Too movement. And now that all goes back to zero. He's not a free man. He was also convicted in Los Angeles, but the New York conviction has been wiped away, and prosecutors have the really difficult decision of whether to leave things be or start again from scratch.
And I know we've spent a lot of time covering this case on this show, with you in fact, but just remind us why the prosecution's case was seen to be fragile even then.
The controversy of this case was always about which women would be allowed to take the witness stand. So think of it this way. If you took all of the women who have horrifying stories about Harvey Weinstein, they could fill a whole courtroom with stories about his prediction. However, the number of those women who were candidates to serve at the center of a New York criminal trial was very small. A lot of these stories are about sexual harassment, which is a civil offense, but it cannot send you to prison. It's not a crime. Some of these stories took place outside of New York City. Others took place a long time ago, which meant that they were outside of the statute of limitations, or they were afraid to come forward. So at the end of the day, the case the prosecutors brought was only about 2 women.
2 out of 100.
Yes, and both of those women's stories were pretty complicated. They had disturbing stories of being victimized by Weinstein, but what they also openly admitted is that they had had consensual sex with Weinstein as well. And the conventional prosecutorial wisdom is that it's too messy for a jury, that they'll see it as too gray, too blurry, and will hesitate to convict. So prosecutors, working under enormous public pressure and attention, figured out what they thought was a way to bolster their case, which is that they brought in more witnesses. Remember that part of the power of the Harvey Weinstein story is about patterns. It's about hearing one woman tell virtually the same story as the next woman. It becomes this kind of echoing pattern that is so much more powerful than any one isolated story. So prosecutors tried to recreate that in the courtroom. They did that to searing effect. They brought in these additional witnesses who had really powerful stories, and that was instrumental to Weinstein being convicted.
But these were witnesses whose not actually on trial.
Exactly. Prosecutors were taking a risk by including them because there's a bedrock principle of criminal law that when a person is on trial, the evidence should pertain directly to the charges that are being examined. Anything extraneous is not allowed. So prosecutors took this risk, and it seemed to pay off in a big way. When Weinstein was convicted in February of 2020, it was by a whole chorus of women's voices. What seemed to be happening is that the legal reality had kind of caught up with the logic of the Me Too movement, in which these patterns, these groups of women, had become so important. And then, to heighten things, the same thing basically happened in Los Angeles. Weinstein was tried in a second, separate trial, and he was also convicted, also with that kind of supporting evidence, and sentenced to another 16 years in prison.
And on the same strategy, based on a chorus of women who all joined forces, basically joining their allegations against him.
The rules are different in California, but yes, it was a similar strategy. So Weinstein goes to jail, the world's attention moves on, the story appears to end, but in the background, Weinstein's lawyers were building a strategy to challenge the fairness of these convictions, and they were basically saying this evidence never should have been admitted in the first place, and Megan and I could tell that Harvey Weinstein's lawyers were getting some traction. His first appeal failed, but by watching the proceedings, we could tell that the judges were actually taking the questions pretty seriously. And then Weinstein's lawyers took their last shot. They made their last case at the highest level of the New York courts, and they won. And that panel of judges overturned the conviction.
And what exactly do these judges say to explain why they threw out this conviction, given that another court had upheld it?
Well, when you read the opinion that came out on Thursday morning, you can feel the judges' disagreements kind of rising from the pages. Picture like sort of a half moon of 7 judges, 4 of them female, listening to the lawyers' arguments, wrestling with whether perhaps the most important conviction of the Me Too era was actually fair. And in their discussion, you can feel them torn between, on the one hand, the need for accountability, and then on the other hand, the need for fairness.
So there was a sort of sense that this is an important moment, and this case represents something perhaps bigger than itself.
Absolutely. There was a lot of concern, first of all, for what was going to happen to Weinstein himself, all that symbolized, but also what sort of message they were sending going forward. So the judges divide into, let's call them 2 teams. The majority are basically behaving like traditionalists. They're saying things like, here's one line, under our system of justice, the accused has a right to be held to account. This trial that wasn't directly relevant, didn't directly serve as evidence for the 2 central acts that were being prosecuted.
So those majority opinion judges simply say that this was a kind of overreach by the prosecutor, that this isn't how the criminal justice system works.
Exactly. And then if we call it the first team of judges the traditionalists, let's call the dissenters the realists. And they're talking about the way sexual crimes play out in the real world and what's necessary to effectively prosecute them. And they are incredibly critical of the majority. They use words like, I'm looking at the pages now, oblivious, naive,
and then exit
phrases like an unfortunate step backwards, endangering decades of progress,
exit right,
perpetuates outdated notions of sexual violence, allows predators to escape accountability. What they're saying is that these rules of evidence have to be somewhat flexible in the real world, because otherwise they're not going to capture what really happened.
You can really sense the passion in this argument. You know, you really get the sense that this court is bitterly divided over this question. And what I'm hearing the dissent basically saying is that if we overturn this conviction, we'll be pushing ourselves backwards. Like, this is regress.
And that the evidence served a really important function in the trial, that something is lost without it. But in the end, that point of view lost out. In this case, the traditionalist judges prevailed by a single vote.
We'll be right back.
The Daily is supported by Progressive Insurance. Customers can simplify their insurance needs and protect what's important by bundling home and auto. Learn more about bundling at progressive.com. And by Colgate University. Now in its third century, Colgate is dedicated to intellectual rigor and academic exploration. Learn more about liberal arts education in New York's Shenango Valley at colgate.edu. Hear the stories shaping the world's conversation. You're listening to The Daily, produced by The New York Times. Learn more at nytimes.com/The Daily.
This is News 88.7.
Howdy, this is Dominic Anthony Walsh, Houston Media's Education. Houston's public school system.
The decision was revealed behind closed doors in the basement of the Capitol this morning.
I've been covering the state takeover since before it actually happened, and I can say there's a lot that you haven't heard on the news.
This is an idea that has been well-worn and also disproven.
In the new podcast, we are bringing you the full story, not just what happened, but why it happened.
So we're going to do things that are bold, and it's going to be a little scary.
It's called The Takeover, a podcast about power and education. You can listen to it on May 3rd, Spotify, Apple, and everywhere else you can find podcasts.
Support comes from John Moore, helping with plumbing, electrical, and air conditioning repairs, including out-of-warranty units since 1965. Details at 730-2525 or at johnmooreservices.com.
When Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein was convicted for sex crimes 4 years ago, it was celebrated as a watershed moment for the Me Too movement. Last week, New York's highest appeals court overturned that conviction. My colleague Jody Cantor on what this really means for Weinstein and for the Me Too movement. So Jody, now that this conviction has been overturned, what's next for Harvey Weinstein?
Well, back in New York, prosecutors have a really tough question to face, which is, do they retry this case? On the one hand, the Weinstein conviction meant so much to so many people that to just drop it seems very unsatisfying. But on the other hand, their attempt failed. Those women are going to be very difficult to get back on the stand. And are they really going to start from zero and do this all over again?
Especially given that this conviction has just been overturned.
Exactly. But meanwhile, the other thing to keep your eye on is the appeals in the California case. Weinstein's attorney told the Times that next month they are going to file an appeal in California that will make many of the same arguments that they did in New York. Now, the California rules are a little clearer on what evidence is admissible, so we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I should add that this attorney is the same one who succeeded in getting Bill Cosby's conviction thrown out.
So, is there a world in which all the convictions against Weinstein will be overturned?
Sure, Katrin, it's very plausible.
Wow. Now, given that, what does this ruling mean for other legal cases, for other Me Too cases that are currently moving through the legal system?
Well, it's definitely a symbolic blow for the Me Too movement, and also for accountability, which is part of what powers the movement. If you think of progress like a wheel spinning forward, part of what powers the wheel is accountability, because women only want to come forward if they think something may actually happen. When they see consequences for some men
driving the Me Too movement and sort of persuading all these women to come forward, then this ruling seems to be undercutting that.
Never mind. I'll find a new route.
It's also a sign of health in the system, because what we're seeing in prosecutions across the country is more testing of this sort. Prosecutors are starting to bring cases that they never would have brought years before. Maybe they're messier, maybe the evidence isn't perfect, maybe they're less traditional. And so to prove those cases, you have to try to get new kinds of evidence in court. And some of those attempts are going to succeed, as they did in the Weinstein trial the first time around, and some of those efforts are going to fail, as we see with the overturning of the conviction. But that kind of experimentation, potential expansion is potentially a sign of the health of the system, and the idea that the legal system may be, to some degree, catching up with Me Too.
So you're saying another way to look at this case is that it sort of represents a legal system trying to navigate this new reality and sort of trying to figure out in real time how to deal with these kinds of cases. It's almost like a trial and error, one step forward, two steps back dynamic.
But also, I want to add that, you can't score Me Too like a basketball game. Every time there is some big outcome in a Me Too case, R. Kelly gets convicted, Governor Cuomo resigns, Bill Cosby gets convicted, Bill Cosby walks free. There can be this temptation to draw huge conclusions from that. It's a victory for Me Too, it's a loss for Me Too. But these cases are not necessarily reliable indicators of what's really happening, what's really changing, because what we're also seeing is real structural change on the legal level. Laws protecting women have changed in, I think, 23 states since 2017. The New York statute of limitations was extended for rape directly in response to the Weinstein allegations. It's now much longer. And recently, New York State opened a kind of new window for survivors to sue for long-ago offenses. So even as these individual cases rise and fall one by one, the system is slowly changing.
So on the one hand, the Harvey Weinstein case actually changed legislation and created this whole new set of laws around these kinds of cases. But on the other hand, the criminal case against him was ultimately shut down. So I guess my question is, how should we think about the Weinstein case? And does any of this change the way we should see his case as the kind of defining case of the Me Too movement? And
go straight
Weinstein
on
himself as the kind of defining central character?
I think the question that Megan and I have had for a long time is whether any criminal conviction in any city is really the best measure of what Harvey Weinstein did or didn't do. Because at its essence, the Harvey Weinstein story is about work. What was really special about him as a producer, his particular genius, was for making careers. He made Gwyneth Paltrow. He made Matt Damon, Quentin Tarantino, a lot of producers who are very successful now. That was kind of his superpower. But what we now know is that he also used that superpower to manipulate and hurt women. In story after story about Weinstein, the same motifs come up. A lot of these women were really young. It was their first day, their first week, their first month on the job. They wanted opportunity. They wanted a piece of the action. So though the annals of the Harvey Weinstein story do include these instances of very troubling, allegedly criminal behavior like rape, and then the essence of the story, I think, is about what happens to women in the workplace, the opportunities they have, the way their ambitions can be used against them. And that's not something that any criminal court can capture. When you talk to Weinstein victims, of course you hear the famous things they've said about the kind of physical offenses, the bathroom stories, the hotel room stories, but you also hear them talk about their own careers. They say things like, I lost opportunities because of this, or I could never work in Hollywood again. And they say, My whole life is different because of that. I can never get those years back. And it's just not something that any criminal court is quite built to capture.
And then turn left.
So in a way, you're saying that the story is much bigger than those criminal allegations against Weinstein. In a way, they're like kind of the tip of the iceberg. But underneath, there is this whole culture of men abusing their power against women in particular in the workplace.
Exactly. And thanks in large part to the Me Too movement, this is behavior that used to be widely tolerated, and it's no longer socially acceptable.
And Jody, I wonder, have you spoken to some of the women that you spent years talking to and hearing from who came forward to share their stories about Weinstein and others? Have you spoken to them since this latest news?
And then turn left.
Yes, and I have to tell you, the Weinstein survivors are pretty resolute. They don't really see this as changing the story. When we first got the news from the court, the first person I called was Ashley Judd, the first actress who came forward about Harvey Weinstein. And what she said to me was, that she was disappointed, that this was upsetting, but she was also unwavering. She said to me, "We know what really happened."
And I guess in some ways, that's the legacy. The truth was aired in a court of law.
We never knew what the legal system would do. We never knew whether he would be convicted or not. But the story stands. It's the women who are the narrators of this story now, and that won't be overturned.
Here we are.
Jody,
safe and sound.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Daily is supported by BetterHelp, committed to helping clients with issues ranging from relationship challenges and goal setting to grief and depression. Learn more at betterhelp.com/public. And by the new investigative podcast, She Has a Name. It explores the disappearance of Anita, a young mother from Detroit who mysteriously vanished in 1987. Hosted by the co-host of Fresh Air, Tanya Mosley. Listen now to She Has a Name wherever you get your podcasts.
The Daily is powered by the journalism of the New York Times.